Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome to the 28th Xamarin Android tutorial. And in this video, what we're going to be working on is gestures, okay? So before I get into what a gesture is, you may already know, let me show you the project that we're going to be working on, okay? And this is a card flip application that has two fragments, okay? And when you double click on it, it will give you that card flip effect and take you over to the next fragment, okay? And this happens, and this is activated when you double click it, okay? So that's the gesture, the main gesture that we're going to be working towards, okay? Now, if this looks familiar to you, there's a reason why. What I'm going off of it is the card flip example from the developer Android website, okay? And one of the reasons why I'm doing this is because I've been getting a lot of comments on, is it hard to translate Java code to C# code? Or I'm used to getting a lot of my ideas or practicing from the developer website, but that's all in Java. So what I thought about doing is following an example straight from the developer website, and of course it's all in Java for like Android Studio or Eclipse, but writing it, of course, in Xamarin over here in Xamarin. And then that way you'll have the two projects to compare to, okay? So you'll be able to see the common differences between doing it in Xamarin Studio or Xamarin with C# and then do it in Java, okay? So that way you'll be able to compare the two and see what's different. The only thing different that I've done is over in the developer website, they have a action icon that flips the card, where I thought it'd be a good idea to talk about gestures, and that way it's activated through a double click, okay? So that's the only difference. But as far as anything else, doing the card flip and the fragments and stuff like that, that's all the same, except that now you'll have something to compare to. So hopefully that'll help you seeing that it's actually not too bad switching from Java to C# or vice versa. There are a few differences, but once you get the hang of it and you start looking out for those differences, you'll be able to see, and you'll be able to take those examples from the developer website and easily translate them into Xamarin using C#, okay? So now let's talk about a little bit of what a gesture is and what are some common uses of them. Alright guys, so before we actually start implementing the onGesture listener, let's go over what a gesture actually is in Android, okay? So a gesture is a movement of the fingers in a particular way to imply something specific, or in other words, to do something specific to imply something specifically to be done, okay? So examples are tap, double tap, long press, fling, scroll, and pinch, okay? And there are some other ones, but these are some common ones that are implemented in a lot of applications. So when the user does one or the other, they expect something differently to happen, okay? So how are we going to implement a gesture in Android? And there are a few different ways, but we're going to do it a pretty simple way, okay? And that is using the simple onGesture listener, okay? So the simple onGesture listener is a class that we're going to inherit from, and we're going to override some of its methods. And a few of these methods are on double tap, which is called when a double tap occurs, okay? So you can think of this as a double click on a computer, okay, like with a mouse, okay? So this is a double tap with your finger. Now, the other method that we're gonna implement is the on long press, okay? And this is called when the user holds their finger on the object longer than a normal click, okay? So it's not so much a tap. It's just a long tap, and then it just holds, and then it'll get called after a second, okay? The next one is a pretty cool one. This one's the on fling, okay? So this one is called when the user quickly moves their finger in any direction and lifts from the screen quickly, okay? So if we were to pretend like this laser is someone's finger, if we were to do this and fling it, and as soon as you hit to the top, you let go quickly, then that will call the on fling method, okay? And then in any direction it'll work. It's just when you let go of the object that the gesture is tied to, it will get called. When you let it go quickly, it'll get called, okay? So that's the keys for the on fling, okay? And the reason why that's important is because it's similar to the on scroll, but it is different in the fact that the on scroll is more of a smooth gesture, okay? So it's something that, like, if you're scrolling through a list view, or if you scrolling through like a horizontal scroll view, okay? So you're scrolling through easily and then you let go, of course, but you let go at an easy rate, okay? You let go quietly, okay? Where the on fling is a type of scroll where you let go very quickly, you kind of fling it. And the last one that we're going to look at is actually a really common one. It's just a single tap confirmed, and this can be known as it's just a single click. Okay, so this is implemented easily when you don't really have to do the simple on gesture listener. Of course, when we do a click, we just wire up a click event. But this is one that can be implemented. Okay, but the common ones that are used when you're overriding these simple on gesture listeners methods is the double tap. Is when you do a double click on a view, the on fling and the on scroll. Okay, so these ones are some common ones that you probably want to use when you're inheriting from the simple on gesture listener. Okay, so that being said, guys, let's go back into the code and start programming this up. Okay. All right, so let's get coding, guys. The first thing I'm gonna do is I am going to take out this application over here, and what we have here is a startup project, okay? I haven't changed anything in it except the properties for the minimum Android target and the target Android version. And other than that, I've imported the image that we're gonna use to flip, okay? So in this tutorial, what we're gonna be doing is doing a gesture, okay? So we're just gonna be working on the actual gesture itself, where the next tutorial, we're actually gonna do the card flip, okay? I decided to segregate the two to where we could just work on a gesture in this for any view. So this will work for any view, guys. So any view you have, wire up a gesture for it, where it's a fling, whether it's a double tap, a single, that'll work. And then in the next tutorial, I thought it'd be a cool idea to show you how to do the card flip, and that way you can implement that in some other applications that you do, okay? So the first thing that we want to do is we want to create a fragment, okay? And this fragment is going to be the actual main view, and then that's going to be the view that we wire up the gesture with, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new item in XML, and this is going to be the front of our card, okay? So we'll call it card front, okay? All right, so now that we have our card front AXML file, I am going to copy and paste over the design, which is all it is just an image view, guys. So an image view that's going to hold the drawable image, which is the little Android guy, okay? So that's all that's going to do. It has some scale type property and it has a content description. So pretty basic stuff, and that's all this card front is going to be, just the image view of the image, okay? So now that we have that, let's come back into our main activity, and what we're going to do is we're going to create a fragment, okay? So the fragment is going to represent the front of the card, and we're going to create another fragment in the next tutorial that's going to represent the back of the card, okay? So let's do that first. Let's create the front card fragment, since that's all we're going to be using in this tutorial. So let's do public class card front fragment, that's what we'll call it, and we'll inherit from the fragment class, okay? Now the first thing we want to do is we want to override the onCreate view, okay? And this is much like the onCreate for the activity, except this is the onCreate view. This is what you override here commonly, is the onCreate view method, okay? Now what we want to do here is we want to get the front of the card. We want to actually get the view for the front of the card, which it comes with an inflator, so that's really handy. So we'll use that inflator and we'll call upon its inflate method, okay? So this should be, if you've been following along the other tutorials, this should be pretty procedural now. And we'll use the resource.layout.card front, okay? Which is the card or the design which we just created, okay? So that is this guy right here, okay? And that's all that is. So let's see, let me make sure this didn't get changed to, I made it an XML, I'm going to actually make it a AXML, okay? Sorry about that, guys. And once it's a AXML, then we will be able to have a design for it, okay? That's really the only difference in this case, but just make sure that's an AXML, not an XML like it was initially. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, so now we have a view that has been inflated, okay, which the view is just this exact view right here, okay? So now that we have this, it gets passed into our view variable. And then what we can do is we can wire up a touch event, okay? So not a click event like you would normally do, which is here, but we actually want to do a touch event, okay? And the touch event is called when it's clicked, when it's long pressed, in any kind of way is it touched, this guy gets called, okay? So that's perfect in this case. Any kind of touch event, this gets called, okay? Not just a click, but a fling, any kind of thing. So over here is where we're going to pass in, and we're going to use our gesture, and we're going to let the gesture handle what kind of touch it is, okay? What kind of gesture, right? So before we do that though, guys, let's go ahead and come over here and let's create our fragment, okay? So this is the onCreate view, which is just the main file, all right? But the main file is not really going to do anything because of the fact that we're going to have a fragment, which is the front of the card, replace anything in the container, okay? So what we're going to do is we first check to see if the bundle equals null, okay? And notice that the bundle is what's passed into the onCreate method, okay? So if it equals null, it's brand new, okay? It's just starting up. Now we'll make a fragment transaction, okay? And we'll get the transaction from the fragment manager, okay? Now one thing you might see in the Java code is it's get fragment manager, where here it's just a property fragment manager, okay? Because remember, a property has a getter and a setter, where Java doesn't have those. So a lot of times when you see like get fragment manager or set, getter set, you can almost guarantee that it's going to be a property in C#, okay? Sometimes it's not, so just make sure you check that, but most of the time it's a property instead, okay? Now that being said, let's get we can call the begin transaction, and that passes back a fragment transaction, which is perfect. Okay. Now before we do anything else in here, let's come into our main AXML file, okay? And all our main file is a container for whatever fragment gets replaced in there, okay? And the way that is it's using a frame layout, okay? And frame layouts are great for acting as a container to hold whatever, okay? So what we'll do is we're going to do it in code. We're going to replace this whole frame layout with a fragment, okay? And then when the next fragment comes, we'll replace that frame layout again with another fragment. So all it is a container to hold fragments, okay? So now that we have that, come back over here. We're going to rebuild it. Make sure everything is good so far. Okay. Now, what we want to do now is we want to take that transaction and we want to add, and we want to replace the fragment, or like, I'm sorry, the container, which is remember what's in the main file. So we're going to take that frame layout, which is the container, and we're going to replace it with, this is the method, this is the method that we're using, okay? Notice that there are three. This is the method that we're using. So we're going to take the container and we're going to replace it with a fragment, okay? And the fragment that we're going to replace it with is the card front fragment. All right? And the last thing we need to do is we just need to commit. We just need to say, okay, everything's good. Go ahead and do the add and anything else before it. Go ahead and commit it and do it. Okay? All right, so now that we have that, our onCreate view, our card fragment will come in. It'll create the view. It'll replace it. And all will be good, okay? So let's go ahead and ensure that that is working the way that we expect it to, okay? So what should happen, guys, is the fragment should be called. It should replace anything in the container, which is just a frame layout, which is in the entire view, okay? So it should fill the entire screen. And we're not getting anything. Let's try to, oops. Okay, so we're not getting any kind of fragment, okay, which is why we run it, to make sure that everything's working right, which it's not. So let's see what we did. Okay, so what we did is what I didn't do is we didn't return the front of the card, okay? So we set up the view and everything, but we didn't do anything with it, okay? I didn't do anything with it. So just a mistake that I made. So we didn't return any kind of view. We returned the base view, which wasn't anything, which why we didn't see anything, okay? So like I said, always good to run stuff and make sure. And if you see something, then what you'll be able to do is fix it. And then therefore, if it happens again, you'll probably know the fix, and you won't spend hours wondering why, because, oh, I've been here before, I've just not returned the front card. Okay, so let's hope that fixed our problem. Awesome. Okay, so now our card is showing the entire view, right? Now, it just threw an exception because I clicked on this, the touch event came and it threw the exception that I haven't yet implemented the card, okay? So that being said, let's go ahead and get rid of this stuff and let's go ahead and implement the gesture, okay? So the gesture, guys, is going to be a class that we create, okay? And remember in the slideshow, what we're going to do is we're going to inherit from the gesture, the simple on gesture listener. Okay, so we'll call it my gesture listener. Okay, and it inherits from gesture detector, and this is a simple on gesture listener. Okay, so anything we override will be here. And here's all the methods that we can override, okay? Notice the on double tap, the on long press, all these, okay? So what we're gonna do first is gonna be the on double tap, okay? Now before, we're not gonna do anything in this tutorial, we're just gonna write into the console that it is getting called, okay? Now in the next tutorial, what we'll do is we'll actually create the next fragment, and flip the card, okay? But in this one, we just want to wire up some gestures and make sure that they're working properly, all right? And then we can also do another one like on long press. And then once again, we'll just do a console right line to make sure that it is working the way we expect it to. Just do a long press. And then these ones will just return true. Oops. That one you actually don't have to, just avoid method, so we don't have to return any kind of object. And the few other ones are just to play around with are the fling method that we talked about, and then also the scroll, okay? So I want to show you guys these ones because of the fact that they are similar, but if you play around with them, you should be able to notice their differences, okay? So let's do a console right line, and we'll just do fling for that. And then down here, we'll do a scroll. Okay, so these methods are going to get called and in the appropriate event, okay? So the motion event is going to get passed in, and then depending on if it's a double tap, a long press, or whatever, it'll get called, okay? So now we need to wire up the gesture listener. Right now, it's doing nothing, okay? So the way we can do that, guys, is let's come into our main activity, okay? And let's make a global variable. And actually, I'm sorry. Yeah, we'll make a global variable, make it public, and it's going to be of gesture detector type, which isn't something we've made. This is built in, okay? Gesture detector. So we have not yet used our my gesture detector. We have gesture listener. We have not yet used that, okay? So just make a instance of it over here. That's going to be equal to new gesture detector. Pass in the context, okay? And then, oops. What we want to do is we want to pass in our my gesture listener here, okay? And that wires it up to this gesture detector right here, okay? It says this is our gesture detector that we need to use, okay? And then because it takes in the my gesture listener, so it comes in here and it says, okay, this is the thing that I call whenever my on touch event gets called, okay? Which we have not yet done, okay? Which is going to be done right here, okay? So in order to do that, guys, what we need to do is we can't get to the activity easily, okay? We can pass in some variables, whatever, but we need to get access to my gesture detector, which is the reason why I made it public, okay? But in order to get to it, we need a reference to the activity that called it, okay? And it's actually really easy to do in a fragment, okay? So we're gonna get a reference to the instance of the activity that called the card front fragment, okay? Remember, it called it here. So we're gonna we'll actually call it parent activity, seems more appropriate. And all we need to do is do an activity, take the activity property, okay? And then it's going to error, which means that we just need to cast it, okay? So the activity is a property once again. In Java, you'll see that it's get activity, okay? It's probably gonna look something like get activity, all right? But in C#, it's just a property that does an underlining get, okay? So we don't have to deal with any of that, right? So that's one of the main differences is the properties of getters and setters in Java and properties in C#, okay? So now that we have a reference to our activity, we can now call the mGesture detector, and in that we want to call its onTouch event, okay? So we call its onTouch event, and notice that it takes a motion event type, okay? Which we can get from our arguments right here. So e.event, and notice the event is of motion event type, okay? So it gives us a motion event, which we pass into the onTouch event of the gesture detector. And voila, okay? So now that we have that, what's gonna happen, guys, it's gonna come into here, and then it's gonna call one of these depending on what event got called, whether it's a double tap, a long press, or whatever, okay? So let's go ahead and run this and ensure that this is working properly, okay? All right. And what I'm going to do right here actually is I'm going to set a few breakpoints to show you the flow of what it's doing, okay? So let's first ensure that it's working correctly. And we should see down here at the output some of the stuff that gets called. So this is going to write to the console, which is going to be in the output right now, okay? And the next tutorial will actually implement some of this stuff and flip it, okay? So when we do a double tap, notice right here it's double tapping, so that gets called appropriately. When I do a long press, that gets called. When I do a fling, that's getting called. And when I do a scroll, that's getting called a lot. So scroll, 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 and then let go, okay? So notice how a fling is a type of scroll where it's quick, and I let go of my, I guess you can say, my mouse in this case, where a scroll I let go, but I let go easily, okay? Or a fling, I fling it. All right. So now let's step through one of these and let's see the flow of this, okay? So it gets called right here. Any kind of touch gets called right here, all right? So as soon as I do that, this gets called, right? And let's set a breakpoint on each one. And what happens is it gets called in the touch event, okay? It says, okay, at this point, I know that this view, which is this entire card, has been touched. But I don't know yet what happened or what kind of touch it was, okay? So I'm gonna pass it to the gesture detector, and I'm gonna pass it my event, okay? So my event, inside of the event, tells me what kind of touch it happened, okay? So I'm gonna pass it to the gesture detector and let that guy take care of the rest, okay? So let's step through that. And we'll do a wait. Okay, so now and then it came into, at the point that it got out of here, it came into our gesture, or my gesture listener, and it says, oh, okay, I need to call on double tap because that's the kind of touch or gesture that happened, okay? So let's go into here. I touched it again, nothing happened, okay? So this is a single tap, which we don't have wired up, okay? So let me do a single tap, just a click. So this still gets called, yet it comes into our gesture listener, and notice that nothing gets called. And that's because we haven't overridden the on single tap. Okay, so it comes into here and says, okay, there's nothing that's overwritten that I need to handle. This motion event just isn't going to be taken care of. So it just ignores it, okay? So I hope that makes sense. I hope that clarifies on kind of the flow of what's going on with these gestures. And in the next tutorial, like I said, we'll actually implement the card flip, and what we'll do is we'll leave these the way they are, but the double tap is what's actually going to flip the card, okay? So that'll be a kind of a tutorial that follows this one, but still shows you something else that's pretty cool, okay? All right, so that's what's going to happen in the next tutorial. As always, thanks for watching, guys.